Dr. Luke Juran, my colleagues, Professor Rajamohan Rao, Dr. Rani, Professor Arvind, Dr. Nupur, and also many other faculty and research scholars from our university as well as from other universities. As we wait for the others to join us, we will begin, and I would like to introduce Luke Juran. He is an associate professor of the Human Ecology of Water in the Department of Geography and at the Virginia Water Resources Center Research Center at Virginia Tech, US. Luke investigates the impact of water and hazard upon the anthropogenic systems with a focus on reconstructing water and sanitation infrastructure after disasters. Luke has primarily examined the provision of water and sanitation services after the 2004 tsunami in South India, but he has also conducted research in other parts of South Asia and also in Latin America, like, for example, Bangladesh, Nepal, Costa Rica, Tanzania, Malawi, and elsewhere. Juran's research has been published in the International Journal of Water Resources Development, Environmental Management, and also Geoforum, as well as the famous Indian Journal of Gender Studies, which is equivalent to Web of Science. And that's the ultimate journal for gender studies specialist, and Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and the like. Juran's current project examines the deployment and impact of a WASH behavior change intervention program in rural Orissa. And he also is not new to India. In fact, his other half, if you give me permission, is from Kerala. So he is half Indian, Luke. Let me take the liberty to say that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no problem.
Although
we welcome it, madam.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We welcome.
So Luke is going to speak on the topic unnatural nature and society relationship, the intersection of gender, the environment, and social systems. Over to you, Luke.
Thank you very much, Azai. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate the invitation and this opportunity to interact with all of you. I wish I could be in India right now, and perhaps in the future I will be there. So I look forward to hopefully seeing you in the future. I'm going now to share my screen. So let me do that. You should be able to see my screen now, and hopefully you should see a presentation. Is that correct?
Right, we can see it.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll just go for it, right? So again, thank you very much. And as I introduced me, I would just say again, to reiterate, I'm at Virginia Tech, a university in America. We have a lot of departments. It's a large university. We have over 30,000 undergraduate students in one location. And I'm in the Department of Geography. Yes, sir.
Professor Ajay?
Yes.
No, but it's not audible now.
Oh, I can hear him. How about the others?
We can hear, ma'am.
Yeah, I think there's some problem at your end, Dr. Ramlu. Can you cross-check?
Yeah, what do you want me to check?
No, Dr. Ramalu, one of my colleagues.
Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, and no problem. Anyway, I'm at this Virginia Tech, and I'm in the Department of Geography. So I'm a geographer. I care about how humans interact with the Earth, right? And so the Earth has lots of systems. There's environmental systems, there's social systems that we create. There's hybridized environmental and social systems. And that's what I want to look at. And any time that we interact with the environment, things happen. And so I want to look at kind of two lenses to get us started with. And the first is environmental justice, or what I would refer to as environmental injustice in this case. And this is sort of what I'll be presenting, because the whole issue with environmental justice is that there shouldn't be uneven impacts of environmental processes or of environmental externalities. This goes for not only the burdens of environmental processes, such as pollution and flood vulnerability and the siting of really heavily polluting and noxious industries, but also the benefits we get from the environment, like ecosystem services, recreation, tourism, the profits that we get from the environment. And so these things need to be shared equally, both the benefits and the burdens. And only when we do that will we achieve environmental justice. And the reason I'm using this as a lens is because the whole goal is for no disproportionate impacts, no uneven impacts in who gets these burdens or who gets these benefits, who reaps them. And as you'll see in this presentation, if you look at interactions with the environment through the gender lens, you'll see this is not the case. This is not happening. The last point I'll make, and which just brings us to the next slide, is that I'm talking about the environment here in terms of the natural environment, natural ecologies. However, if you look at the definition of environmental justice, it's much broader than that. It's where anywhere we live, anywhere we work, play, pray. In that sense, everywhere we are is our environment. It's not just the natural environment, but also the social environments. And in fact, I think we know a lot about those social environments because we see them every day in terms of gender. There's lots of gender issues and inequities. If you look at the legal environment, the legal sphere, the decision-making sphere, whether you're talking about governments, corporations, universities, any sort of institution, as well as inside the household, who makes decisions. Obviously the workplace, our religions are heavily gendered. There's various other prescribed gender roles that occur in society. And these are all the sorts of social environments also we can look with a gender lens and see these inequities. And if you look at it that way, then it's more than just, the natural environment. So I wanted to bring that up quick, even though I'm focusing, as you can see by the last point, on gender and nature, and then social systems, so natural ecologies. Now that we have sort of a goal, which would be, are there uneven impacts? Are there uneven burdens and blessings from the environment when you look through a gender lens? That's what we want to do. However, what about those relationships? And this will be sort of the last theoretical lens I'll use, is one way, and there are many, there's feminist political ecology, deep ecology, political economy, there's Marxist geography, there's a lot of lenses you can use. One simple but effective one that actually comes out of India from Vandana Shiva is ecological feminism or ecofeminism, and basically saying that there's parallels between the way society treats the environment as well as the way society treats females. And the argument is, there's patriarchal, androcentric sort of capitalistic structures that not only dominate and exploit nature, but also women. And just like society reduces nature to capital, to profits, to resources that humans can use, they also use that vein to objectify and reduce women to also being objects, sex objects, people who reproduce culture, people who have prescribed gender roles. And that really comes through in the binaries that are set up when you use this paradigm. The man-nature binary, which is how society treats the environment, in which humans are not part of the environment, but they're separate from and above the environment, is extremely similar to how society treats women and sort of the man-woman binary, in which men, just like they're above the environment, they're above women. Men are strong, women are weak. Men are rational, women are irrational. Men are logical, women emotional, right? Then we get into even things in the institutional spheres, where when men talk and are assertive, they're seen as big, strong leaders, where when women do that, they're seen as, very shrilly, women who are not under control, who are powered by their emotions, and they're seen as bitchy, right? And this is not fair, and these are false binaries. And this is just another lens to look at and say, you know, these binaries exist instead of equals, right? Instead of everybody being equals, deserving of equal treatment. And so you can see a lot of these binaries, as well as the disproportionalities that I mentioned in the previous slide, in the environment, right? And so that brings us to, I guess, 3 quick vignettes about how women, nature, social systems interact with the environment. So one really basic one is if you just look at agriculture and food production. Women play an extremely key role in all aspects of the food supply chain, all the way from sowing the seeds to harvesting the seeds. They sell commodities at markets. They purchase commodities at markets. They're the ones who prepare the food. They're the ones who preserve the food for future consumption. If you're talking about pickling mangoes or pickling gooseberries or whatever, they're the ones who are drying fish, drying food, storing food, managing the nutrition, planting and managing kitchen gardens to help out with nutrition, and all these sorts of things. And they also work alongside men in the fields. And you'll see on the next slide that even though they're working alongside men in the field, they're not earning the same rate as men by a long shot, often about 60% of what men are making. And there's actually been research that shows they're even more productive than men in the fields because they take less breaks. Basically, they work harder. With that is biomass, the collection of biomass, basically wood, charcoal, other things, is primarily retrieved by women. I think we know that, but the other burden of that is that they're the ones who are cooking and burning this the most. And that exposes them to a lot of other issues that men are not afflicted by as much. When you're standing over a stove, when you're standing over a hearth, when you're boiling water, when you're boiling milk, when you're cooking rice, you are predisposed, or you're exposing yourself to a whole host of secondary issues, from air quality, acute lower respiratory infections, increased cataracts, headaches, low birth weights in children, of course, just getting burned and scalded from the cooking and the fires. And these things obviously are happening more to women because they're the ones who are doing it. And if you sort of look now at this first vignette, which, you know, then we'll move on to the next one, you can start to see that it's argued because of women's different relationships with the environment, and because of the unequal loads they carry in different environmental processes, it's been argued that perhaps women, because of this different relationship, have a different view of the environment and perhaps a more holistic view of nature. And one example of that, again, from India, you can see is of the Chipko women, and saying, you know, these forests are a reservoir of life. They clean our water, they provide food, they provide habitats, they provide biomass, and they are not just trees and timber and lumber. There's a whole fountain of life there. And so it's been argued that, you know, because of the relationships, these views sort of come into play. Here you can see actually gendered wages in agriculture, where I do most of my research in Tamil Nadu. So as a state average, you can see women are only earning 62% at the state level of what men make for doing the same job, basically 65 rupees versus 40 rupees. You can see at the state, if you go to the different districts, it can be worse. For example, go to Coimbatore. Now they're only earning 51% of what men earn. They're doing the same jobs. And like I said, research has shown that they're equally productive and often more productive because they take less breaks. You can see the same thing with harvesters. Again, on the state average, they're making about 60% of what men make. But if you go to a place like Namakkal district, it's even as bad as 37% of what men make when they're interacting with the same environment. And you can see here various photos, some of mine and some others that I've grabbed, of how women interact, working with fish, working in the fields, working at markets, going to markets, preserving food, doing all those things that households rely on. Here you can see women gathering biomass. It can be a hard job, especially with water scarcity, desertification. Every time you have to go get biomass, you might have to go a little bit further because you've already harvested the closer stuff. If you see the top left, that's in Rajasthan, and a woman doing that hard work. Another vignette is how women and society interact with water and water resources. I think this is pretty basic. We know this, that water is predominantly retrieved by women, often girls as well. A lot of that is starting to go away because universal primary education for women, a lot of these sustainable development goals and things are starting to take a little more root, but that's still true. It's not just that they're retrieving it, it's that this is very taxing and hard work. There's injuries associated with it, right? One 20-liter vessel of water, it weighs a lot. It weighs 20 kilos. Try carrying 2 of them at a time for a couple kilometers. That's a lot of work. Remember, a lot of these people are barefoot, right? They are subjected, not necessarily in India, if you go to sub-Saharan Africa, for example, while they're doing this, subject to animal attacks. It's not uncommon, and you can look this up, to be attacked by hippos and crocodiles and have snake bites, right? And some of these are deadly. And because they're the ones getting the water, they are the ones who are exposed. When there's conflicts over water, it's women who have to be involved over fighting over the water. And while they're doing this, there's all the opportunity costs, the loss of paid work, the loss of unpaid work, which is extremely important. And we're starting to now monetize. Economists are trying to monetize this unpaid work to make it productive, to show that it's productive. Even just leisure time and other tasks and missing school, all these things are given up because of this unfair burden. But it's not just the collecting of water, it's the full on managing of water. Because once you get it home, you have to store it, you have to serve it, you have to cook with it, clean with it, help your kids bathe, get the bath ready for your husband perhaps, do laundry with it. They're the ones who have to boil the water, again, with the biomass that they also went and retrieved. If they're doing point of use water treatment, like a filter, boiling would be another example, but a filter or something, it's often the women who are doing this. And because of all this knowledge, they're the ones who are often coping with the issues, coping with shortages, identifying other sources. And when you take all this together, you don't have just the opportunity costs, just the fact that you're managing it. There's also that you're disproportionately exposed to things that are in the water, right? If you're the one who's gathering the water all of the time, you're disproportionately exposed to waterborne illnesses, but also zoonotic illnesses, things that are in surface waters, right? Animal pathogens that are in the water that can go to the oral route where you get sick. There's unique health issues that women face that are related to water in terms of hygiene when you're menstruating, in terms of being dehydrated if you happen to be pregnant and affecting your lactation and ability, to get nutrients to your child. And because of this, if you've read about water management, one of the 4 principles of integrated water resources management is that women must have a seat at the table for managing water. Since they disproportionately are involved in interacting with water, they need to have a seat at the table. And that's been codified as one of the 4 principles of integrated water resources management. I'll just show you a couple of things. This is all from my research. These are the women who have to go out at specified times of the day for 1 hour to collect water. They have to wait in line. There's often not enough. You can see how many vessels are there. They'll call them kodams in Tamil Nadu. And how much work, and each one of those is 20 kilos, right? And carrying them home, often barefoot. This is, you can see now, getting to waterborne illnesses and zoonoses, right? In that water that they're collecting water from is animal feces and frankly human feces from open defecation. There's other vector diseases, things spread by flies and mosquito habitats, right? And so they're the ones who are interacting disproportionately with these health hazards. They're the ones who have to go and purchase water, right? They're up top. You see a woman who has a water purchasing card and they put a stamp on for every vessel that she purchases. It's the kids too sometimes that have to go out and get the water in very, unfortunate situations. And you can see again in the top right, the pollution surrounding all of the water access point and the other health hazards you run into while you're just trying to secure water for your family. If you know this scholar, her name is Farhana Sultana. She's from Bangladesh. She's at Syracuse University in America. She's a fellow geographer, and she studies a lot on water and gender and natural resources and gender, often from a feminist political ecology lens. And here she's saying in one of her papers, you know, a disproportionate share of the labor and the burden of ill health from inadequate water provision and sanitation falls upon women. She then goes on to talk about all the things I just mentioned, you know, having to walk to get it, having to manage it, having to use it to do all the household work. And because of that, you cannot underestimate this side of the water burden. Again, I'm using these words because it all comes back to these are environmental injustices. Who is oversharing the burden? Who's oversharing the benefits and the injustices that come? This brings it to really some research that I like to do that gets into water poverty, right? Since water is so important to us, we have to have it to live. And so water security becomes an issue, right? You should have access to affordable, readily available water at a good quality and a good quantity to not just support your human health, but also your economic livelihood, and also at a rate of consumption that still maintains environmental health, right? The environmental integrity. And so when you have that, you're okay. But when water security is not met, you can fall into essentially a poverty trap. Some people call it water slavery. It sounds a little extreme, but what they're basically saying is when your life is so controlled by finding water, securing water, managing water, and doing that all day, you miss out on all these other opportunity costs, your productive opportunities, your recreational opportunities, paid employment, education, simply just getting to enjoy life. And eventually, this burden of obtaining and managing water becomes so great that it limits your life opportunities. It limits your life potentials. And in that sense, you become a slave to water. Water controls your life because you both struggle from water and for water on a daily basis. And you can see some quotes at the bottom, those 4 quotes. Those are all from women that I've interviewed. This is in Nagapattinam, Tamil Nadu. I'm not going to make judgments and say these people are in a situation of water slavery because I cannot speak for others. But if you look at what they say about how all their energy first goes to water and only then can they worry about the rest of their life, that I have to concentrate 100% on water or else we won't have enough, that all I can really do is adjust to water. I don't even have any control over water. I just have to adjust to whatever water does. What can I do? If you read these sentiments, you can start to see that these things of being water insecure and being a slave to water can be true. I've actually dedicated a lot of work to this. And, you know, to me, this picture, and here, having to manage multiple tasks at once while you're going about your day of water, this shows that water is really controlling people's life. It's really affecting women's lives. And it can do that to such an extent that it creates something called water poverty, a water poverty trap. And the argument here is that water and poverty aren't just linked, they are actually mutually reinforcing. They feed each other. There's feedback loops between them. And there's been research to show natural resource control and access and control of resources, particularly water, is associated with socioeconomic status. That's not surprising at all. A quote from a scholar, he was writing on Bangladesh, he's from Bangladesh, QK Ahmed. He says economic and social vulnerabilities feed each other. You can't address one vulnerability, lack of water, because you're afflicted with another vulnerability, which is lack of money. And because you can't address the former, then you have less of the latter. And what happens is you become entrenched in a water poverty trap. This should make sense because if you have access to good water, right? If you are water secure, you have good water at an adequate quantity, you can live healthily, you can live happily, you can predict your day, you can have a productive life. right? And you can meet all these basic needs. But if not, you get into a poverty trap, right? And I've written a couple papers on this and built a water poverty index that I've used across 24 sites in southern India. And I try to work on fixing these inequities. And so here's some of the study sites. I think this is only 14. I have over 24 now. But these are all villages that were built after the tsunami and people were relocated. They built a lot of water infrastructure and sanitation and drainage infrastructure and housing infrastructure for all these people. But there were lots of inequities. And here I'm talking about the benefits and the burdens and what's fair and equitable across space. So you can see all these sites that were all built at the same time in the same place, that are all connected to the same water systems, at least in each district they are. But there's a lot of variability in quality, in how much access people have to water, whether they have another secondary source of water in addition to what's provided by the government. And remember, when you're looking at this, you're really looking at women who are managing each of those curves, right? They're the ones who are dealing with these inequities. And so I try to give this information to the government, provide policy recommendations, provide recommendations also to the individuals to build capacity. You can see here that these are really multidimensional indicators. You can see here all of the indicators that I just showed. If you break access down, you can see that itself has several different indicators that I'd look at to try to reduce conflicts, for example, to try to reduce distance that you have to walk to get water, to try to reduce how many households per tap need to be supported. So the density of people that need to be supported by each tap. I try to map that out and show the differences across space. This is a very geographic perspective, is to look at space and to look at how human created attributes upon the landscape are distributed, and whether that's random, whether there's a pattern, whether these things are related. I'll show you a bit of that when I get into social vulnerability as well. These are I just showed you a couple studies. These are also ones that I'm drawing off of. So when I'm talking about, the development of those places, that's one of the papers. And when I talked about boiling water and the biomass and the different health impacts, it comes from that boiling paper. And I've also done some work here in Malawi that gave me a lot of other information when I was talking about gender and water. The interesting thing is everybody talks about water, and that's maybe because water is clear, it's clean, it's refreshing. You can take pictures of smiling faces as they're at the hand pump or gathering water. It's really good for marketing. It's really good to raise money. But the other half of water is after you use it, it becomes sullage, it becomes sewage, it becomes an effluent, it becomes gray, polluted water. And we have to deal with that. So one of those things, other than drainage, is the toilets, right? And toilets or latrines have a huge gender dimensions in terms of how women interact with these. I've done a study here, again, in Tamil Nadu, and there's a lot of literature on this. But one thing I found out in my study is that one is adoption rates were higher among women than men. Not everybody uses a toilet when you provide it to them for various cultural and economic and spatial and religious reasons. But overall, women take up latrines at a greater rate than men. Now, this is for good reasons often. Maybe it's more convenient. Maybe they like it more. But in a functional sense, less sexual violence, less harassment, more privacy or security compared to open defecation, right? But sort of a double-edged sword I found is that while there were greater adoption rates among women, which we were to expect, that is expected if you read the literature and the studies, I found that a portion of those elevated rates among women were also because men wanted the women to use the toilets. They sought to protect the women, their daughters, their wives from the societies that they inhabit. And essentially they're subverting female agency and encouraging them to use toilets, not necessarily for a health reason, but because of chastity and the family view and the reputation. And this gets into, again, women being the carriers of culture, women being the ones who reproduce culture and who should be pure and things like this, right? And then another part of this study is that when you provide toilets to families, while you may be helping the women escape things like harassment, violence, sexual violence, you're also adding to their workload. Cleaning toilets is a gender delineated role. Stocking the toilet with water so you can flush the latrine is a woman's job. And so even though a lot of these toilets are put in also through a gender angle to help women, a lot of people aren't realizing that when you do that, you automatically increase the economic and time costs and other opportunity costs of women, because they're the ones who have to stock them. They're the ones who have to clean them. And it gets to the point that if you have a toilet and women don't take care of it, then it doesn't get used, right? And that puts a lot of weight on women because of their gender roles. The last vignette I will do, again, I started with food and agriculture briefly, and I just did water and a bit of water and sanitation. Another is disasters. This is a highly studied field, I would say, and I have a couple publications on this, and actually another one under review right now that I hope to have come out soon. But if you read the literature, and it shouldn't be a surprise if you study any of this, it has been proven that on average, not in every case, but on average, women are more likely to die from disasters. And not only that, they're more likely to also experience morbidity and mortality in the post-disaster arena when compared to men. So what that means pragmatically is then, if on an average disaster that occurs somewhere in the world at any given time, probabilistically, more women are likely to die. And after it, they're more likely to face health issues, so morbidity, and die from those morbidities, so post-disaster mortality, compared to men. I'm drawing off of a couple studies here. Here's one from Indian Journal of Gender Studies. There's another one in Geographical Review. It's one of their geographical record pieces in Geographical Review, where I've done this also in Bangladesh. And there's a whole panoply of studies here. And this also goes to places like my country, right? There's studies on Katrina, the two on the left, about sexual violence and gender and race and class and all of these issues in America too. There's also studies out of Australia, out of Central America, obviously out of South Asia, which I'm talking about now. So why is it that women experience more morbidity and mortality? Or is it even true? Well, it is true. I said it's been proven, right? And so there's been a very, I would say, an exemplar study done by geographers, by Neumeyer and Plumper. This is in Annals of the American Association of Geographers. And they did a longitudinal study of over 140 countries over more than 20 years. They added up all the mortality data and morbidity data that were sex disaggregated. And they found that more women die and more women experience morbidity on average compared to men. Statistically significant. There's also been meta-analyses of over 108 studies that come up with the same conclusion. Not only that it's particularly acute in countries defined as lesser developed. Here's some examples of that. I'm not going to read them, but the 1970 Bangladesh cyclone, another cyclone, the Latur earthquake in India, the 2004 tsunami in India, but also Sri Lanka and Indonesia, in Bangladesh, a tornado. All of these women were overrepresented in mortality and morbidity statistics in terms of being the most or the second most afflicted group, other than sometimes the elderly, because those are a very vulnerable group. Here's a couple more that aren't mentioned. For example, there's Cyclone Nargis. They also brought in the Japan earthquake here. So you can even see in the case of Japan, one of the most developed countries in the world, this is the case. I already mentioned Australia and America as well, because I want to put everybody on notice here, right? I'm not calling out only certain places. You can see this though, this is where I conduct my research in Tamil Nadu. You can see that the deaths of women, it should be at 1. So at 1, there's parity. For every 1 death of a man, there's 1 death of a woman. If you're below 1, that means more men died than women. In all of these cases, more women died than men from the 2004 tsunami. In Tamil Nadu, it was almost 1.5, about 1.4 women for every man. If you see some places in Sri Lanka, in Indonesia, it gets to 2 and above 2. That means double the rates, right? That's a big difference. That's not a small difference. So what is going on here? What is the issue? It's been postulated, and this is a very straw person sense. This is a very weak argument. It's been postulated that this is just something that's natural. This is natural because the real cause is just that women are different. They're biologically, anatomically, physiologically different. And that's the reason. It's been argued then with that contention that it's because men are faster. They can run more quickly and get out of dangerous situations. Men are stronger. They can climb up higher and hold on to objects. They can swim farther because they're stronger. They can swim longer and they can swim faster, and they can hold on to objects in floods. And then it's pointed out that if you look at these things like being faster and stronger, that these things are even made worse when women are pregnant, right? Men cannot become pregnant, women can. So when they're pregnant, then they run even slower, and maybe they can swim even less, right? So they're trying to prove that this is all natural stuff, right? And then finally, that men weigh more than women, as in addition to having more muscle mass than women, and then therefore they're less easily swept away by water and wind and debris and all these sorts of things, right? And so the whole argument is this is just a natural thing. More women die than men in disasters, but there's really nothing we can do about it. But that is not the case. This is a flawed argument. All it does is reify those false man-woman binaries that I talked about earlier, right? I talked about environmental injustice, and I talked about these man-woman binaries, that men are strong, women are weak, men are fast, women are slow. And this is just a simple explanation. But it's not true. If you look at the study that I mentioned by Neumeier and Plumper, they said while differences in sex, for example, muscle, speed, while these things do account for a portion of the mortality gap, those differences do not account for the full disproportionality. And that means that if natural variables cannot explain the statistically significant discrepancies, then there must be unnatural variables, meaning socially constructed variables that are causing those enhanced deaths and morbidities among women. Well, that basically means vulnerability. Then men and women have different levels of vulnerability, because what vulnerability is, it's not like risk, where risk is more biophysical. Vulnerability gets into the social variables. All of us have all kinds of social variables before the disaster occurs that are in us. How prepared are we? What is our socioeconomic status? What is my education level? What technology do I have and do I have access to? Same thing for resources, social networks, all of these sorts of things, right? If you add those up together, you have all the variables that either make me susceptible or less susceptible to a disaster. So if you look at all of those things, they're all shaped by gender. And in each of those arenas, being prepared, having access to liquid funds, having higher levels of education, having the ability to make decisions inside the household, those things are often less for women, and those things need to be drawn upon when a disaster comes and drawn upon after a disaster in order to cope and manage and to have agency. And when those things are restricted, which is a socially constructed paradigm, then you end up with disproportional deaths among women and men. In other case, sex accounts perhaps for a bit of the mortality gap, but the social variables that already are on the ground. Remember, I showed you on my second slide, discrepancies in the legal sphere, discrepancies in religion, discrepancies in corporations, discrepancies in governments, right? All those are already dealt, right? The cards have already been dealt to women in advance. Now the disaster happens and they are more vulnerable, and you end up with exaggerated mortalities and morbidities. So what you can do, and what I've been working on, is social vulnerability. There's something called SOVI, the Social Vulnerability Index. It's been developed out of University of South Carolina by Susan Cutter. She's, again, a fellow geographer. And what it does is it tries to map where are people more vulnerable, so then we can direct resources, policies, soft and hard measures to try to decrease these environmental injustices, right? These red spots are environmental injustices, okay? The thing is, how do you measure social vulnerability? Well, gender is a big part of that. Of course, poverty is there, infrastructure, ethnicity, access to hospitals, education level, all that is there, but also gender is a big major component. So you can see these maps are actually made by overlaying all of these, each individual sort of index for each of these components and then putting them together. So here, gender is a big one, and you can see where are the gendered hotspots. Migration is also a big one. I mentioned that because Azai works on migration quite a bit. So those are big indicators. You have to look at these. Something, if you're interested in, is that you can not only test these for statistical significance, you can actually test their existence across space to find hotspots and clusters that are statistically significant. So when you do that, you find here a bunch of clusters that would focus resources and policies and such in the right direction to, again, decrease the disproportionate burdens upon society. And one of those is the gender lens, which I'm showing there in that one slide. I'll begin to wrap up then and say that nature-society interactions are unnatural. What we're seeing is unnatural because they result in environmental injustices among women. I've shown this in ag, in food, in water, in disasters. And again, to bring you back to the beginning, I focused on the natural environment. When you expand the definition or your conceptualization of the environment to include the social environment, then this is even a greater issue. It's a very huge issue. Now, I said these are unnatural. That means they're socially constructed. That's good news, because if it was a natural problem, then it would be really hard to solve. It's something that we're just subjected to. But this is a humanly created problem, which means humans can actually solve this problem if we work together. I posited some essential questions here. You know, how do you actually do that? How do you ungender spaces? How do you tell societies to relax their gender norms? How do vulnerable populations do this? How do vulnerable populations go about dismantling systemic injustices, structural injustices that exist in governments, education systems, the business communities? And how do you do that in informal settings? In, public spaces like markets? How do you do that in the household in terms of decision making? And when you do it, how do you measure that you actually made gains in these settings? It's very difficult. Finally, I just want to point out some caveats, because no study or no presentation is 100% correct. You need to look at it through also the limitations or the caveats that exist. And I want to be straight up and say, gender is just one component of vulnerability, right? I focused on gender, but race, education, age, income, your disability status, all of these are dominant variables, and you really have a whole calculus of what creates inequities in society, and gender is just one. That's why intersectionality has become a really big approach. Another thing to point out is that women are not a monolith themselves. They are not a homogeneous group. Further, sometimes women actually co-construct and reinforce gender norms to reinforce status, to reinforce class, to reinforce family pride, right? And finally, on this point at least, when I talked about all these issues, these are large-scale findings and conclusions if you look at lots of things across space. However, sometimes more men do die in disasters. It's not every case, it's on the average. And sometimes women actually do have more power than men, right? And so again, these are generalizations that are true across space and at larger scale, but you always have to pay attention to the specific context. With that being said, my goal is not to pit men against women with this research or with this presentation. I'm a man. I'm not trying to start a fight with anyone. My goal is to help everybody, right? All vulnerable persons need to be helped. We need to decrease all the inequities so that there is no such thing as vulnerability, because everybody has the same susceptibility, right? The research domain that I'm talking about, the various domains I'm talking about, they do include other groups. It's not only about gender. In fact, they specifically are inclusive to all sorts of subaltern communities, elderly communities, differently abled, indigenous communities, as well as not just men and women, but various genders and sexual orientations, and all of these things are part of it. And finally, my last point is, there's a whole field of research on men and natural environment, men and disasters, men and resources. And it's becoming an emerging field because men too have unique relationships with the environment. Men too have vulnerabilities with the environment. They're the ones who disproportionately have to respond to the disasters, who have to clean up for the disasters, who then therefore get lots of health exposures because of that. They're the ones that when bad stuff happens, they have to act like a man, and often with poor emotional management because they can't cry or they don't want to show their emotions. A lot of resource-based employment is low pay, and there's been a lot of loss of resource-based employment, mining, timber industries, different things like this. And so they're disproportionately affected by that. That hurts them because they feel pressure that they're the ones who have to support the economy, support the family, that they have to protect their family and do all these things because they have gender roles also. And when disasters happen and jobs are lost, they don't know what to do with their free time, and they feel pressure that they need to support their family. And this can lead into issues of increased suicide, increased substance abuse, increased alcoholism, as well as increased violence among women because of these pressures and poor emotional management. So the study of men and these issues in these fields is also front and center these days. And that is everything I had to say. I think I kept it to right there at about 40 minutes, hopefully. And I just welcome questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luke. This is a thought-provocative lecture, and you have looked at nature and man interacting in a nuanced way with the rich empirical data from your field work from India, mostly also from Africa. I must say that your talk on space, biomass, and gender, while examining the accessibility to water and environmental injustice, just mind-blowing. A lot of comments in the chat box already. And I really like the way you have highlighted that women become victims of water slavery. In fact, I'm hearing for the first time today about what women becoming a slave because of water and how they are trapped in water poverty in our part of the world. So it is just thank you so much. The way you have mentioned, even with menstruation, which is my area of research, and toilets, open defecation, and its hygienic practices in regard to accessibility to water. And like the way you pointed how violence against women will be reduced if they have access to water. That was mind-blowing. And of course, you have looked at the whole issue of patriarchy and the need to recognize women as carriers of culture and provide the solution to the problem by looking at a feminist intersectionality theory. So thank you so much for this thought-provocative lecture. And I also welcome a lot of my colleagues, Professor Arvinder Ansari from Jamia Millia, New Delhi, Dr. Binita Behera from KIIT, Orissa, and also Dr. Jayashree from Karnataka, Dr. Rashni from Punjab. Thank you so much. I know many more are there, and also students from different universities, including our university. Thank you. There are a lot of questions raised. May I first ask Professor Arvinder, and then I'll like to give time to Dr. Binita. Arvinder, please.
Thank you, Ajailo. And I really congratulate Professor Luke for such a wonderful presentation and seeking our attention to water poverty, and especially in context where we are celebrating in our Swachh Bharat program that we have built toilets, and how these toilets have, increased the workload of women. That was remarkable point, and it was very, that is how we critically engage. But, I just want to see, putting everything, you have very well problematized that what is the relationship between nature, culture, and gender. The whole feminist epistemology has been critiqued that, how do we negotiate this divide, or one would say this conflict with the reason and passion. There is a argument that feminist methodologies are more rooted into passion. What you also pointed out in your presentation, that the whole development paradigm is more influenced by Western patriarchal development model. So how do we negotiate? What is your suggestion? Because problematizing is fine, but how do we negotiate is a question which, if you could reflect a little more.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to point out one caveat.
Professor Ajay,
first.
Yes.
One caveat is, yes, sir.
Let you finish first, then I'll come to you. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay.
Yeah, as I was saying, I want to first I talked about caveats. I would say about myself, I do not consider myself someone who studies gender. Okay, I would honestly say that. I am someone who studies relationships with the environment. And because I do that, and because it's often with water, it happens to be that the people I interact with are women, because that's just the biggest theme, right? And so I would first actually step back and say other people are bigger gender experts than me. So I study the theme of water environment. It just happens to be that gender cuts through all of those so distinctly that I end up studying it and becoming very passionate about it. I just wanted to say that first. In terms of how do you do that? So I understand it's good to be passionate, right? And you should be passionate about doing something to help people, that will help society, and that brings parity to society when there are injustices. It's good. You should be passionate about that. But what you brought up is that it also feeds into that false man-woman binary, that these people are just making a big issue and they're being all emotional and they're over exaggerating these issues and just causing a big ruckus, right? But so some ways around that would be to channel that passion and the activism into what's now CBPR, community-based participatory research, where you go into this with goals of affecting change and with into your research design is the fact that there is an issue that's already been identified and that we're going to find ways to galvanize the community to actually go solve that problem. And so that community-based participatory research, I think, one, allows you to situate yourself in a methodology that also allows you to bring in passion and affect change in an applied way. But so that's one thought. And my other second thought is, honestly, I don't have an answer for that. If I had an answer for that, then I should have a Nobel Peace Prize or something, right? Because that is one of the world's wicked problems, big problems. I cannot answer that myself. But those questions I asked on that one slide get at what you're talking about. How do we ungender these spaces? How do you really do it functionally? How do you measure it? How do you get societies to relax their norms? How do you change institutions? That's really a hard task, and it's a really slow task. And I don't have full answers to those questions, and I wish I did. And like I said, if I did, then I would be a really famous person in the world, right? Because I would be solving a big problem. I would look at also your students that you teach and to get them, you know, the children are role models for other peers. They're the ones who are going to be doing things in the future. I feel each generation, even though it's slow, does make incremental changes. And that's more just from an educational standpoint as we're faculty and students.
Yeah. Thank you. I will just ask Dr. Binita before I give time to my colleague, Dr. Ramalu. Binita, are you there?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, please go.
Thank you, sir. It was a very good presentation, considering that I also have a wee bit knowledge of geography. I had geography as one of my subjects in undergrad level.
Good job.
Yes, yes. So, sir, actually, considering the Paris Summit of 2015, and we can't even wait too much in the present calamity that is almost in the offing. It's looking at us in the face, the climate change issue. And as per the summit, the different countries and India has also made some nationally determined commitments to sort of combat the problems that it has. And one of the major issues for India is water. So yes, I agree, and you very modestly and very truly you said that if you would have the answer, nothing like it. But still, I would just like to ask you, like as a geography, as a person who's who specializes in geography, and this wonderful research that you've done, and a wee bit about our society. And one of the biggest challenges about our society is the stratified situation that we have. So the technology as well as the utilities and the everything mostly is appropriated by people who are in the higher rung. So I mean, invariably women, if we look at the intersection, it would be women in the lower rungs of the caste and class society of India. So I would just still ask you to give us, I would like to hear you on this, some kind of an imagined solution or something that you've seen in some other country which is similar to India.
Should we take another question from my colleague? Shall we take another question?
Yeah, I can answer Dr. Benita's question. You want to throw another question at me too at the same time?
One of my colleagues also is keen to ask you some questions. Would you like to take?
Yeah, let him complete, Professor Ajaylu. It's very interesting actually. I would like to listen that answer also. Yeah.
Okay.
There has been work, you would be aware of this, and I actually haven't studied these a lot, and they're more in North India compared to where I conduct my research. But like Pani Panchayats is one example of trying to get women involved in water management and give them authority and some capacity and agency. That's one example. In Malawi, where I did work, this is in the urban setting, but there they make water user committees or water user associations. They have to have women on them. So that's gender mainstreaming. And I think that's what really needs to happen is we need to force this to happen because we've been waiting for changes. And this, changes are very slow in the gender and these sorts of fields because they're generational changes, they're cultural changes, they lag behind physical changes, are very instant, right? And so I think in this scenario, we need to force the change a little bit. One way to force that is through gender mainstreaming. You have to have women represented on these committees. Not only that, what I saw in Malawi is that when they made that rule, all the women were stuck on the lower levels of the committee of just being the note taker, or they just kept the records of the budget, but they didn't have really any control and they weren't at higher things. So you have to gender mainstream, which kind of forces it along. And not only that, they have to be in meaningful positions where they have an impact and control on these processes. So I think that's really important. I also mentioned integrated water resources management. And so that's another guidelines to follow. And in that, 25% of it is about getting women into the management field. And it's not only for water management, it's our government agencies, it's the military, it's the professoriate, it's corporations, it's the legal sphere. Look at who the judges and advocates are. If we can gender mainstream in all of these, it's not just in water, all of these spheres are male dominated. And specifically, frankly, in India. And the more we can gender mainstream across all of these things, then I think we'll become a little bit better. But the Pani Panchayats are one example. Malawi does have the water user associations. IWRM is another approach. But I think that gender mainstreaming and forcing the change is kind of what needs to happen. It will happen slowly, but can we wait that long? We've been waiting already for a couple thousand years, so.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you so much.
Fantastic answer. And also, Binita, thank you for your question. Dr. Ramalu, would you like to take your time?
Yeah, am I audible, Professor Ajay? Ajay?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank our HOD, Professor Ajaylu, for a series of intellectual feats after she took over as HOD. So many very, very serious and relevant intellectual presentations have been made in the recent past. And this is the ultimate presentation of the entire series of the lectures. Thank you so much for this. Sir, really, all your presentation has made us to draw several similarities and several experiences we experience in our rural life every day. Thank you so much. I don't have any words to comment, but I would like to share some of my doubts with regard to Indian society, because you have already said everybody is equally susceptible. That is absolutely true. But the point is that gender discrimination makes it is rooted in the religious scriptures as well as traditional practices, and finally that has been ingrained in people. And if you see the practice hypocritical approaches in India, you see about women, about the status of women. At certain point they say yatra naryastu pujyante tat where women are worshipped, there dwells gods and goddesses, and something goes like that. At the same time, this religious practices and scriptures also comes out with another statement that Nastri Swatantra Marhati, no is for freedom. That kind of confrontation, contradicting approaches and hypocrisies have been put into the brains of people, and that destroys the harmonious fabric human beings with social integrity, everything, whatever you say. On the other hand, they are also making societies days for political reasons. One in the sense taking us back to the medieval times, also certain circumstances. Given this situation, I really feel it's quite difficult. Actually, whatever has been there in the ground realities you have presented, don't find a way out. Really feel very painful and sensitive when you are presenting the things. And I don't have any question as such, but this is to appreciate you and how to overcome these traditional barriers which dump into this kind of nonsense into the minds of the people that women are secondary citizens, women are like sexual objects and all, whatever you have said. This conservative character, how to address this? Definitely this is because of the conservative. If there is no gender discrimination, there won't be such kind of issues brought before us. Right, sir? So this is my observation, and thank you so much. We have really enjoyed your presentation. You have clearly presented as to how women were made and their lives were inflicted, environmental vulnerabilities and social difficulties. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Professor Ajalu, for such a wonderful presentation of Professor Dr. Luke. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll let someone ask a question. He didn't ask a question. I would just reply and say, yes, I agree with what you said. And in terms of the religion and gender, there is a lot of irony there. There's a lot of, we can say like Janus-faced, two-faced sort of thinking when it's the same thing in China. So in China, they have a saying that women hold up half of the sky. At the same time, they had the one-child policy and all these other issues with marriages and different things, and how it was, more patrilineal and all those sorts of things, right? And they had the same thing. They have Maoist talks about how women are so important, at the same time women being subjugated, and it's really hard to look at that. It makes your head spin. And I agree, you have goddesses like Saraswati, right, who I love, and Lakshmi. I love these people. And so we teach them that these are great things. We should even worship them, and we clean our house for them, and we burn incense for them. And in front of our money, we want our money to be safe. If we have a business, right, we do this at our business by the cash register. At the same time, we treat women this other way. It's really two-faced. And you just look at Sabarimala, you try to integrate women just into Hindu temples and Sabarimala, and look what happened, right? And so I don't feel that I'm a person who should change anyone's culture or religion. I'm an outsider, but I do see these things and I find them very ironic and very hard to sleep with. How can you sleep with both of those views at the same time and be honest with yourself, right? I think we have to be honest about that irony.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Otherwise,
Hello.
Hello, sir. Would you like to ask question or comment?
Yes, sir. I want to make some comments. At the outset,
please go ahead.
At the outset, I would like to appreciate our department, Mr. Ajay, for having arranged a wonderful lecture. And really, it is. I thank Professor Luke for having spent his very valuable time to deliver this lecture. Very excellent lecture. He covered everything under sustainable social environment. In fact, I had an opportunity to evaluate one of the World Bank projects in Tamil Nadu, total sanitation net. Just I would like to mention here, I personally visited one village where the president of the village, that is the sarpanch of the village, was a Dalit. And there was a very good water source in the main village. People used to go and get the water. This was the earliest practice. Once the amount has been sanctioned by the state government, then they constructed a very big water tank and provided pipelines, everything to be direct stuff. Then I had it up. I inquired the women When the main village is not able to get the water now, you are getting the water, how it is possible. Then therefore, sir, the water that is being supplied to our colony is just salty water, salty water. Whereas they are getting the good water. In order to protect their water, they constructed this one and they are telling that it is good for us. So this kind of politics also will play with caste bias towards this. So we think that wherever some problem arises, ultimately it is the middle who are the sufferers. We have excellently focused these issues very nicely, water security, water slavery, and water poverty, and all these aspects. And we have enlightened us. Really, it is a wonderful talk. We will learn new things from your lecture. I once again thank you for the lecture. And I also thank the department for arranging this series of lectures over a period of time for the past 2 years of the shooting for the department and appreciation of the district. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I would also, as a way to close this out also, I want to thank Azai for inviting me. So we hadn't spoken in several years.
But I have a request to Professor Ajaylu. Professor Ajaylu, please invite Dr. Luke to the center for a physical lecture. Direct interaction.
Definitely.
Please.
In his next trip to India, we will love to have Luke in our center.
It's not too far by train from Chennai. Train from Chennai to Hyderabad or by flight is very close. So I could probably do that. I'm happy to come. Like I said, I wanted to thank Azai, a lot for getting me involved. I haven't seen her for several years. So, thanks very much for organizing this. I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, same here. Yes. There are so many wonderful comments from people. And I will request Dr. Rani, my colleague, to pronounce the vote of thanks. Rani, over to you.
I think there is some technical glitch.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello? Yeah, madam? Yeah. Okay, Ajay. So, today it's really a wonderful lecture that we have heard. And we must say, it's my pleasure, and I would like to take this opportunity to propose vote of thanks on behalf of CCIP. And first of all, I would like to thank Professor Ajaylu for inviting Dr. Luke Juran for our center and for CCIP, and for conducting a wonderful lecture on unnatural nature, society relationship, especially with relation to the gender, environment, and social systems. And thank you, Ajay. So it's a wonderful lecture, and which talks about women and water exclusion. Okay, so then how this gender has been excluded from the water sources, and extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Luke Juran for delivering the thought-provoking lecture on human relations, especially gender relationship with nature and environment. Sir, your observations in the work of in this scenario, in Indian scenario, is so much helpful to the academic community, to our scholars, and especially to other faculty also. When they are taking up the new fields of research area, and which is very much relevant to our center. And you have touched the the gender and know their relations with their personal relations with the families, and their personal relations in the workplace, and know their health and hygiene issues, and several issues that you have touched. And it is really helpful for our academic community to explore new ways of research in the future. So thank you so much for delivering such a wonderful lecture. And I would like to thank my colleagues, Professor Rajmohan sir and Professor Sripati Ramudu sir, for their presence and for their very thought-provoking observations and comments. And I also thank the faculty from our university, that is University of Hyderabad, and also from other universities, and even the scholars from the HCU and the other universities for joining this lecture and sharing their opinions and observations on the given topic. And also, I would like to thank our office staff, Mrs. Mezbin Khan, and also Purnachandra Rao for their technical support, because whenever we conduct seminars or talks or anything, but their presence is very much essential, and they always stand in forefront to help the faculty, so and extend their technical supports to us. So, and without their support, and it wouldn't have been go with so much success. So I personally thank Mezbin Khan and Purnachandra Rao for that. And finally, I thank everyone, whoever has been presented for this talk, and share their opinions. And Dr. Luke, and we are really looking forward for your presence in the university, your physical presence in the university. And thank you so much for your wonderful lecture. Thank you, one and all.